Some people can explain themselves perfectly and still walk away feeling completely invisible. They leave conversations replaying every word, wondering how something so true sounded so wrong. They are not confused about their feelings. They are exhausted by how often their feelings get flattened by other people's assumptions. What hurts most is not disagreement. It is that quiet moment when someone nods but clearly never really got it. And after enough of those moments, a strange loneliness starts living inside ordinary interactions. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like your real self never arrives. So you start editing yourself before you even speak. You shorten the story, soften the truth, and remove the parts nobody seems to handle well. Not because you are fake, because being fully honest has felt expensive for a very long time. People who struggle to feel understood usually notice more than they can cleanly explain. They sense tone shifts, hidden tension, unspoken disappointment, and the energy behind someone's words. They catch meaning before language catches up. And that gap creates one of the most frustrating emotional experiences a person can carry. You feel something deeply, but when you try to translate it, the translation always feels smaller than the truth. So others think you are overthinking, when really, you are trying to describe something they never even noticed happened. This often starts earlier than people realize. Sometimes it begins in a home where your emotions were tolerated but not truly welcomed. You may have been heard technically, but not felt mirrored or gently helped to make sense of your inner world. Maybe you were told you are too sensitive. Maybe your sadness was treated like drama, your fear like weakness, your anger like disrespect. When that happens enough, you learn something dangerous without ever choosing it. You learn that what you feel and what others recognize are not the same thing. And that split can follow you for years. It makes you question whether your emotional reality is real unless someone else confirms it. That is why feeling misunderstood can hit so much harder than people think. It is not just a bad conversation. It can touch an old bruise that says nobody ever really meets me where I am. So now, even small moments carry extra weight. A friend changes the subject too quickly and your chest sinks for reasons you cannot fully explain. A partner says, "You're reading too much into it," and suddenly you feel 12 years old. Someone jokes about your seriousness, and you smile while feeling quietly erased. These reactions are not random. They often come from a nervous system that learned misunderstanding might lead to disconnection. And disconnection never feels small when your body remembers emotional abandonment. That is why some people become extremely careful communicators. They rehearse texts, rewrite emails, and mentally practice conversations that have not even happened yet. They are not trying to be dramatic. They are trying to prevent that familiar ache of being twisted into someone they are not. Other people do the opposite. They stop explaining altogether and act like nothing bothers them anymore. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is what happens when hope gets tired. Sometimes it feels easier to be misread quietly than to explain yourself one more time. Because explaining yourself repeatedly can start feeling humiliated, especially when people keep hearing a simpler version of you than the one you live with. So you begin carrying entire emotional chapters that never make it past your face. You say it's fine, when what you mean is, I do not have energy to translate. That sentence becomes a kind of survival. It protects you from disappointment, but it also keeps intimacy at a distance. And then another painful pattern begins. You become incredibly good at understanding everyone else while nobody seems to understand you. You read the room before entering it emotionally. You notice who is uncomfortable, who feels left out, who is pretending to be okay. You know how to adjust around other people's needs with almost unnatural precision. But when it is your turn, many people miss the depth completely. Partly because you hide it well, and partly because people often enjoy being understood more than they practice offering understanding. That imbalance creates a very specific type of fatigue. You become the listener, the translator, the calm one, the emotionally aware one. But inside, you are starving for someone to ask one more question. Not the casual kind. The kind that says, I can tell there is more here, and I am staying. That kind of presence changes everything. Because people who struggle to feel understood usually do not need perfect advice. They need someone patient enough to not rush their meaning. They need space where they are not simplified. They need to speak in unfinished thoughts without feeling judged for being hard to summarize. A lot of deeply thoughtful people communicate in layers. Their first answer is rarely the full answer. Their first answer is often the safe answer. The fuller truth usually lives underneath a pause, a sigh, or a sentence they almost say. If someone interrupts too quickly, the deeper truth goes back underground. And this is where many relationships quietly fail. Not because there is no love, because there is no emotional patience. Some people only know how to hear direct, polished, convenient feelings. But real feelings are often messy, slow, contradictory, and half-formed at first. Especially for people who have spent years protecting their inner world. They do not open like a door. They open like dawn, gradually, carefully, almost invisibly, until suddenly the whole emotional landscape is there. But if someone keeps demanding immediate clarity, they shut down again. Then outsiders assume they are distant, when really they are trying to stay safe inside a conversation that feels too fast. This shows up everywhere. At work, they may have great ideas but struggle to express them before the room moves on. In friendships, they may feel close to people who only know 30% of them. In family settings, they may sit quietly while old roles speak louder than reality. In relationships, they may crave intimacy but fear the familiar sting of misinterpretation. Even alone, the struggle continues. They replay moments for hours, searching for where connections slipped through their hands. They wonder if they explained badly. They wonder if they asked for too much. They wonder if being this internally complex automatically means being lonely. That question can become heavy. Because when you rarely feel understood, you can start building an identity around being untranslatable. You start telling yourself that nobody really gets you. And sometimes that belief protects you from further disappointment. But it can also become a prison. Because once you expect misunderstanding, you may stop noticing the people trying to understand slowly. You may test them without meaning to. You may hold back the honest version and resent them for not finding it. You may leave breadcrumbs while secretly hoping somebody will somehow discover the entire map. That is human. When being overlooked hurts enough, direct vulnerability starts feeling almost impossible. So you become subtle. You hint instead of asking. You joke instead of confessing. You say, "I'm just tired," when you actually mean, "I feel emotionally invisible again." And the painful part is that subtle pain often gets subtle responses. People answer the words you used, not the ache behind them. So the cycle continues. You feel unseen, then protect yourself, then feel even more unseen. But none of this means you are broken. It means your inner life is richer than most quick conversations can hold. It means you probably learned to survive without consistent emotional translation from others. It means your sensitivity developed alongside caution. And that combination can make you appear calmer than you actually feel. Many misunderstood people look composed on the outside. They know how to regulate enough to remain socially acceptable. They know how to smile at the right time. They know how to keep the deeper reaction hidden until they are finally alone. Then the truth shows up. The jaw unclenches, the eyes blur, and the body releases what the moment could not. This is why feeling misunderstood is not just emotional. It is physical. It lives in tight shoulders, delayed tears, mental overprocessing, and the fatigue after simple conversations. Your mind keeps working long after the moment ends. Not because you enjoy spiraling, because some part of you is still trying to earn the understanding you needed. That part often believes if you explain it better, the pain will finally make sense. But sometimes the issue is not your explanation. Sometimes the person listening only has a shallow emotional vocabulary. Sometimes they hear through defensiveness, impatience, or their own discomfort with depth. Sometimes they are committed to their version of you because it keeps things easier. And that can be heartbreaking. Because the misunderstood person usually keeps assuming the problem is their communication. They rarely consider that the listener may not have the capacity. So they work harder. They become clearer, softer, more careful, more articulate, more accommodating. And still, the connection misses. At some point, that starts changing your self-esteem. Not in a loud, obvious way. In a quieter way that makes you doubt your own readability as a person. You begin feeling emotionally strange, even when you are actually emotionally precise. You think you are too much, when often you are just too honest for shallow environments. That does not make your pain poetic. It still hurts. It can make birthdays feel weird, group dinners feel draining, and even love feel uncertain. It can make you crave people and avoid them at the same time. It can make you miss conversations that never really happened. But there is an important truth hidden inside this pattern. Your longing to be understood says something beautiful about you. It means you are not looking for performance. You are looking for contact. Real contact. The kind where your inner world does not have to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. The kind where pauses are not punished. The kind where complexity is not treated like inconvenience. That kind of understanding exists, but it usually arrives differently than expected. It rarely comes from being louder. It often comes from becoming more honest in smaller, steadier ways. Not forcing everyone to understand you, but noticing who consistently makes room for what is real. That changes the game. Because healing this pattern is not about making all people understand you better. It is about learning which people actually want to. And just as important, learning to stop abandoning yourself during the wait. That might mean saying the fuller sentence instead of the safer one. That might mean letting your needs sound less polished. That might mean tolerating the risk of being seen clearly instead of admired vaguely. It will not feel natural at first. People who have felt misunderstood for years often trust anticipation more than openness. They expect the old disappointment to return. Sometimes it will. But every honest moment becomes information. It shows you who gets curious, who gets defensive, and who only loved your edited version. That knowledge matters. It saves you from spending your life begging for depth in emotionally unavailable places. And it reminds you that being misunderstood is not always a sign to explain harder. Sometimes it is a sign to move differently, to choose different rooms, to stop translating your soul for people committed to surface-level hearing. There is also a softer shift that needs to happen inside. You have to stop treating your inner complexity like evidence that something is wrong. Not everything meaningful can be explained immediately. Not every real feeling arrives in neat language. Some truths need a little silence before they become speakable. That does not make them less true. It makes them human. And maybe that is the deepest reframe of all. Your struggle to feel understood may come from how seriously you experience life. You notice subtleties other people step over. You feel contradictions most people numb out of. You carry memories in your body, not just your mind. Of course, that makes communication harder sometimes. But it also means your inner world is alive. And an alive inner world needs careful company. Not everyone can offer that. Not everyone was built for emotional depth, and not everyone is willing to learn it. That is sad, but it is clarifying. Because once you stop expecting deep understanding from unprepared people, something relaxes. You become less desperate. You stop performing your pain in ways that secretly beg for recognition. You start protecting your honesty instead of proving it. And slowly, the loneliness changes shape. It becomes less about nobody understanding you, and more about choosing not to stay where understanding is never even attempted. That shift is quiet, but powerful. It gives you back dignity. It reminds you that your feelings do not become valid only after someone else understands them. They were valid when they were still stuck in your throat. They were valid when you could only describe them badly. They were valid when nobody around you had the language to meet them. And they are valid now. So if you've spent years feeling like your real self never fully lands anywhere, hear this. The goal is not to become easier to digest. The goal is to stop disappearing just because other people prefer simpler stories. Some people will never understand you because they only listen for what feels familiar. But the right people will notice your pauses, your patterns, your careful wording, your hidden tenderness. They will not rush the meaning. They will stay long enough for the deeper sentence to arrive. And when that happens, it will not feel loud. It will feel like your nervous system finally setting down something heavy. Because after all this time, The deepest relief is not being admired. It is being accurately felt. And once you experience that, even briefly, you stop settling for almost being seen. You remember that your complexity was never the problem. It was just waiting for a place gentle enough to understand it.